Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to our research workshop series presentation, The Growing Systematic Review Monster. This is the second part of our Horrors of Bad Research series, which is taking place in October, part of spooky season. Lauren, if you want to go forward. I'm Rebecca Morgan, and I'm presenting with my colleague Lauren Robinson. If you want to follow along with us, you can use the QR code here to use the slides, click the live links that we're going to have presenting here if you want to. We'll give you a minute while we take the time to introduce ourselves. As I said, my name is Rebecca Morgan. I primarily work with the College of Pharmacy and College of Dentistry, and I'm one of the health sciences librarians here. Lauren?
Hi, yes, I'm Lauren Robinson. I am the Associate Director of Research Services here at the Medical Center Library, and I primarily liaise with the College of Medicine.
And Laura also kindly put a link to the slides in the chat as well, if you would like to access them that way.
And they will be sent in a follow-up email as well. You'll be able to access them on our workshop series page. So multiple ways to come back and access the slides.
So today we are going to be talking about systematic reviews, obviously, and growing problems with them as a study type. As you're probably aware, they are increasingly popular, and for many years they have been considered the gold standard of evidence synthesis. But if you look at them more closely, they're falling quite short of that common gold standard moniker. So today we're going to talk about why they're failing to meet that high standard and what you need to know about the standards and requirements before you decide to take on a potential project. And we're also going to try and help equip you with the knowledge that you need if you are going to be reading one and what you need to know about what potentially makes a good or a bad review. So to kick it off, we want to talk a little bit about what a systematic review is and the history of systematic reviews, because I think in order to really understand what they are and what the problem that currently exists with them, you kind of need to know about where they came from and how they came about, and frankly, what they are. So in 1992, it was estimated that an internal medicine practitioner would need to read 17 randomized controlled trials a day, every single day, in order to keep up with the current evidence. And if you think about that, having to read 17 articles every single day, every day of the year, that's obviously too much evidence to possibly read and in isolation to understand what was happening in medical trends. And so there needed to be a way to collate and synthesize this rapidly growing explosion in evidence that needed to be adapted by practitioners to stay abreast of the current research that was happening. And so this led to the popularity of evidence syntheses. Although systematic reviews and the methodology around them had existed, actually they first started in like the 30s or 40s, but the methodology that exists today had existed since the 70s. It wasn't really until around the 90s that it became popular as a way to aggregate and synthesize this rapid growing body of clinical data to really allow people to keep abreast of this explosion in RCTs that was happening. So what is a systematic review? I really like this definition because I think it's very clear cut. It's from the University of York's National Health System Center for Reviews and Dissemination. I think it's really important because in order to know how to do a systematic review properly, you have to kind of know what it is. And I think a lot of people, at least when we run into them, kind of have a vague idea, especially if they're new to the process, that, oh, it's just kind of a way to get everything written about a subject the first time. They're unsure of what it actually entails. And I think this definition encapsulates, at least in a very basic way, the standards that are necessary in order to complete one. So let's just read it first. A review of the evidence on a clearly formulated, a systematic review is a review of the evidence on a clearly formulated question that uses systematic and explicit methods to identify, select, and critically appraise relevant primary research and to extract and analyze data from the studies that are included in the review. And then it summarizes another paragraph at the end that basically explicitly says that the methods must be reproducible and transparent. Breaking this down, the very first point that it points out is that it must be based around a clearly formulated question. And this should be built around something like PICO, if you're familiar around that. It's a framework that is built around problem, intervention, comparison, and outcome. It's a way to break down a scenario or any kind of theory, idea that you have into discrete parts so you can break it and create an actual clinical question. And this is important because that means that you have a searchable topic. And if your topic isn't searchable, you're not going to be able to extract the data you need in order to synthesize it and actually do your review. So you need to have a discrete problem with clear parameters in order to do a systematic review. And that is very important as the basis of your whole project. And then second of all, and this is a two-parter, it's very important, and this is a really, really clear and critical part, that it follows, obviously, it's a systematic review, a systematic and clearly defined, and that often, or that should mean a priori, previously defined methodology in the identification process, which is the search process, the selection process, how you select the literature out of that search, the appraisal of the evidence, and then also it says later also the extraction and analysis of the data. And then also it very clearly says that it uses primary and not secondary research. And then finally, reproducibility and transparency are absolute requirements. So all steps must be documented using a reported standard like PRISMA.
So what do we mean by reproducibility and transparency? So evidence synthesis or a systematic review is a type of evidence synthesis, uses, like we said, a structured and reproducible method. So something that's been published on, it's a clearly defined method that is used to, that is published on and that other systematic reviews use. And you also have to critically appraise all relevant studies in response to a specific research query. So often reproducibility and transparency kind of gets melded together, but as librarians and as people who are conducting these reviews, they're very different things, right? So PRISMA, for example, there's several different PRISMA checklists and you have to use multiple ones to be in compliance for reproducibility. So for example, you've probably heard of the big PRISMA checklist, the one that everyone uses for systematic reviews. There's also a searching extension. And that actually provides a checklist for everything that has to be reported about the search in order to make it reproducible. So every component of your review needs to be documented, and therefore that document can be shared so your search and your method can be reproducible. Transparency is a little bit different. It's about clearly writing what you're doing, but also registering a protocol. So a protocol helps ensure the scientific process is being upheld with these type of reviews because you are documenting and stating and registering what you are going to do, how you're going to appraise, what databases you're going to search, what your search strategy is, what your inclusion and exclusion criteria are before you begin reviewing articles. So that increases transparency of your methodology. In addition, you can submit your data, which is actually your search strategies and database metadata, to a repository, so then it can be reused and adapted, and that ensures transparency. So those are kind of the two different things we're talking about when we're talking about reproducibility and transparency in these reviews. And a quick note, there are other type of reviews. All of them need to have clear questions, but it's really the question type that determines what review you're going to use. So we've been talking about systematic reviews. PICO is a really good framework for framing a systematic review question. I always give the example when I'm working with students, like, does Tylenol or Advil better control fever in pediatric populations, right? You can pull out your population, you can pull out your two interventions, and ultimately, what is the outcome for fever control? It's a very good way to break it down. That's a really good style of question for systematic review. Scoping reviews are usually more broad questions. They're not often comparative. You're looking at literature that might be new to the research, or it's so broad, you're trying to qualitatively analyze and group the literature into areas to determine which areas need to be researched more. And it doesn't always involve appraisal. You're finding gaps. And then there's rapid reviews, and rapid reviews can be done a little bit shorter in time frame, because you can add different type of filters. So you can exclude gray lit and clinical trials and different things like that. So they just go quicker, but they follow a very similar methodology to a systematic review. There's umbrella reviews, which is a fairly new review, and these are not really, so as Becky said earlier, systematic reviews and all these other type of reviews are supposed to be about primary research. Umbrella reviews are actually looking at secondary research. They are analyzing, essentially doing a systematic review of systematic reviews. So they're appraising all the different systematic reviews. And those really came from like the quality issue that we're going to be talking about through the rest of this presentation, is that these reviews need to be appraised and synthesized as well. And then a narrative review kind of sets apart from these other three, like so systematic reviews, scoping reviews, rapid reviews, and umbrella reviews all require the same transparency and reproducibility and following PRISMA checklist and things like that. They're all the same rigor. It's just the type of question that shapes those. Narrative reviews can follow that rigor, but they don't have to. You can still develop a comprehensive search strategy. You can still document and record things, but you don't have to be quite as tied to transparency and reproducibility. It's closer to a literature review, but a little bit more advanced than that. So do we just want to touch base on these? We have people who come in who just want help with a systematic review, but often it's actually a scoping review that they're wanting to do. So we just want to point these out. Another thing that I wanted to share, I'm not going to go through all of this today. We actually have a whole nother recorded session about how to choose a review type. And this isn't going to work right now, is it? We'll see if it loads. Oh, okay, it loaded. And what this does, it's essentially a flow chart. It will ask you questions like, do you plan on gathering all evidence on a topic? If not, then a literature review or narrative review is the right answer. And then it gives you some resources available. And then and it just keeps going through this whole process of different questions and giving you links to different resources and leading you to what type of review best fits your needs. So this is a tool available to you. It is currently in the chat right now. We also have a workshop series I did last semester, I believe, or the semester before, on how to choose the right review. And I actually walk through this entire Prezi and give you more details about what type of review is right for you. And we will share that in the chat as well for you. Okay, let me go on to the next slide and I'll hand this back to Becky.
So now that we've laid the groundwork of what systematic reviews are, what they're supposed to be, some of the standards around them, we're going to now delve more into what the topic of this presentation is, which is the growing systematic review monster. We're going to now really dig our teeth into what the problems are. So I opened talking about how systematic reviews became popular because in 1992, that was really when the real influx of RCTs and clinical research exploded. And at that time, there were 17 RCTs that were needed to be read daily in order to keep up with evidence. Well, by 2010, that exploded even more. And then there were 75 clinical trials being published every single day that needed to be read in order to be kept up with. Next slide. And that led to, unsurprisingly, an influx of systematic reviews. And by 2011, we had almost the same thing happen that was happening with RCTs. And 11 systematic reviews were then being published daily. And the charts on the side here obviously show visually that explosion that's starting to happen. And it has only grown to a frankly terrifying rate. In less than a decade, there's been a 5.8-fold increase in systematic reviews to 80 systematic reviews being published in a day by 2019. And I really, really, really want to emphasize that that was before the COVID pandemic. This is more than double the 2.6-fold increase in publishing general literature in the same period. So that's a little odd that there are now more systematic reviews being published than the general literature that the systematic reviews are supposed to be published off of. So there's this real explosion in this type of study being done, and that potentially leads to quality concerns. And I mentioned COVID a second ago. We know that there are problems with the COVID literature because with COVID coming out, everybody was rushing to research. And there's a number of reasons for this. Labs were closed. There was this huge pandemic happening. So people needed to research and publish quickly about and get information out so people could know what was happening out there. But that clearly led to quality issues. And we've seen a cascade of literature. We can actually track it, and you can see it in this chart to the right side. And there was an absolute explosion in literature being published on and during COVID. But we also know that articles were rushed to publication, and already almost 500 articles have been retracted just from that short period of time. And numerous more articles have been marked with expressions of concern on retraction wash. And I would assume that we're going to just keep seeing that happen more and more as people now have time to go back and actually start analyzing these articles now that they have the time to do so. And unfortunately, as we've seen this explosion in systematic reviews, even if it's not exactly the same thing that's happening with COVID, we have seen with the explosion of them real serious issues and quality concerns happening with them as well. In this article, The Problems with Systematic Reviews, you can see in the conclusions that were found here, many hundreds of articles highlight that there are many flaws in the conduct, methods, and reportings of published systematic reviews, despite the existence and frequent application of guidelines. And this is a huge problem because, as we talked about earlier, many people just automatically view systematic reviews as the gold standard. They read them, they come across one, they look up a problem, they say, oh, here's a systematic review, I'm just going to go buy it and it's going to guide my clinical practice. They don't even think to necessarily appraise it or take into any consideration what quality concerns there could be in the execution of this review. And as this review on systematic reviews found, a failure to appreciate and regulate problems with these highly cited research designs is a threat to credible science. So this is actually becoming a threat to our actual clinical practice and our biomedical research.
And I would add to that, it's also how we have been taught to look at systematic reviews. I remember when I was an undergraduate in health sciences, we were taught those are the highest quality of evidence, right? So we assume going into them that they are the highest quality, but given what's happening in the field, it's becoming more problematic. And you can't just take a systematic review and assume it's going to be at the top of the pyramid.
And go ahead, Lauren.
I'm sorry. So the growing systematic review monster. So this article was really interesting. I use this all the time when I'm talking to students. It showed that only 3 in every 100 systematic reviews are deemed to have adequate methods and be clinically useful. And that's just a huge number of hours that are that people are working on to publish these reviews, and only 3 are actually applicable for use. So this article says, like, available evidence indicates that almost all systematic reviews and published literature contain fatal flaws, likely to make their conclusions incorrect and misleading. And then again, it gives that stat of 3 in 100. Examples of research waste and questionable ethical standards abound. Most trials have little hope of providing useful results, and systematic review of hopeless trials inspires no confidence. We argue that results of most systematic reviews should be dismissed. So this is a really strong statement by authors who are Cochrane authors as well. So why are there so many bad reviews? So it's considered quick and easy without a required review by an IRB. Many researchers assume that it's quick, easy, low stakes process that can be done by anyone. In reality, it's a form of research that directly impacts clinical practice. Consider appropriate for students. So we've been having this discussion a lot in the libraries. We have a lot of students who come to us for help with systematic reviews. We're seeing an increase in assignments in graduate school for systematic reviews for students. I've seen a lot of medical students who come in who are wanting to get some hands-on research experience or wanting to do this. But often the time frame of these projects take 1 to 2 years, and that's a lot of work for students. So we just like, if you are a student considering this, take into consideration your workload for school and the time commitment that this project is going to have. Lack of advanced search skills. So many researchers undertake reviews not understanding the advanced searching skills and translation skills needed to search this. You can't just like use a keyword search because that's not going to be reproducible. And that's where us as librarians can come in to help. And you'll actually, we're going to do some activities later that show some of these problems with searches. And then unaware of the methodology. So like I mentioned earlier, we had all those different methodologies, like scoping reviews and umbrella reviews. A lot of people come to us and they want to do a systematic review, but the question really isn't a systematic review question. So they're not aware that different methodologies exist, and they're actually published on. So there's actually published articles on what defines a scoping review methodology that you can use. So there we go. Hand it back to Becky.
And one thing that we also really want to emphasize in this silly slide is a very serious topic, and that it's so easy to forget when you are looking at data and, you know, black and white numbers taken from paper, and it doesn't have to go through IRB, is that, you know, this is people. You know, these numbers are people, they're patients, and this impacts clinical practice directly. As Lauren pointed out, you know, we're taught that this is the highest standard of literature. This is the gold standard. We should look at systematic reviews as something as you should seek out in order to guide your clinical practice. And so really they are made of people, and the data is patients, and they will impact clinical practice. And they're done, when they're not done well, that really has the potential to cause, I think, a greater harm than people necessarily take into account or are willing to take into account, especially people who, not everybody, but some people think this is kind of just a quick and easy project that they can do, and it really should not be taken that way, because that can honestly have some dangerous repercussions.
So then what makes a good review? So this is kind of like a checklist that you could come back to and use. And we're also going to have some tools as well that we'll share that can help you decide on what a good review is. But what I recommend looking at is there a protocol? We now require everyone who works with us at the libraries to publish a protocol or register a protocol. So you can register it in something like Prospero or OSF. And some people go on to publish that in a journal as well, so go through the peer review process. You don't have to do that part, but you do have to register a protocol to be in a compliance with PRISMA. And there's actually a PRISMA protocol tool. You can click on it here if you want to learn more about that one. A reproducible search strategy that has been systematically developed and translated to at least 3 databases. So that's like a really quick way to look at a methodology of a systematic review. Did they include 3 databases, and did they list them out? Did they list the coverage? And I'll come back to that in a moment when I talk about about the PRISMA searching extension. Also, we're gonna show you what some searches can look like, but we really recommend working with a librarian if you are going to do one of these projects, just because the search strategies are very complex. We go through, and we're not just building one search strategy, we're building multiple, and we're testing that over and over again against articles you provide us. So Sentinel articles, we call them. So we use that as a test feature on the search. So it's a systematically developed search strategy, and that we're also testing. We also adhere to Prisma searching. So this is a fairly new tool. So in a lot of systematic reviews, you won't see Prisma searching listed. I think it came out in 2022. So only newer ones will be the places that you see this. And Prisma searching actually has a whole checklist of things the search should have. So coverage. So every institution has different database coverages based off what we purchase from different vendors. So you actually have to list what you're searching in Web of Science, for example, at UK Libraries, because some other university might have a different collection of things that Web of Science is searching. Same with PubMed. PubMed is one way to search Medline, but you can search Medline in Ovid and Embase as well. So how are you searching these different databases is really important for reproducibility and transparency. So someone could take your search and redo it. And again, these Prisma checklists you can go to and you can use them as checklists when reviewing an article or working on one yourself. Data management planning. So there should be a Prisma flow diagram. There should be a comment in the protocol on how they're managing their data as well. And then also there should be at least 2 blinded or a normed group. So they need to define how they went through and both the title abstract and the full text review. There needs to be it has to have critical appraisal if it's a systematic review. So they need to list what tools they've used to do critical appraisal. And then scoping reviews don't have to do critical appraisal. So you really need to know the methodology in order to examine the article and what is required of each methodology. And then also consider, did they list a software that they're using? Did they have a librarian or a statistician on the team based off the goals of the project? So if they're doing a meta-analysis, there probably needs to be a statistician on the team. Those are ways that you can look at the review team of the article and examine it. And then also mention if they've done citation or hand searching. So and the time frame. So hand searching is it when you go through all your included articles and search through all of the references. It's also called citation chaining. And that's actually should be done if you're following Prisma, but not everyone does that, but they need to state whether they do it or not. And then usually these projects take 12 to 36 months. And I always want to point out, like when we're working on these projects, we often get statements that like the numbers are so large, I wasn't expecting the results to be that big. And I just want to say that like evidence syntheses, whether it's scoping, umbrella, systematic review, whatever it is aiming at sensitivity, not precision. So the searching that you're probably more familiar with is precision searching, where we're trying to find articles on a specific question and you're only trying to get a few. So we're aiming at sensitivity. So we're saying like you're probably keeping 3 to 7 articles in your title abstract review for every 100 that you review. So we're really expanding that sensitivity. So that's another way to look at their Prisma flow diagram. Do the numbers like really match up in that flow diagram with their topic? Does that number seem realistic? And it's supposed to be hard. I say this all the time to students, like it's not an easy methodology to do. You have to learn a lot of new tools, a lot of new processes that you're not used to. Like Becky said earlier, it impacts clinical practice and patient outcomes. You need to have a clearly defined question, which is one of the hardest pieces, I would say. I've worked with students where we spend a couple months just trying to narrow in their question to meet, so they're not getting too many articles or too narrow of articles. It has statistical analysis. You have to maintain transparency through data management as well. Critical appraisal and risk of bias is also something, if you've never done before, you have to learn how to use those tools. Searching multiple databases, learning controlled vocabularies, learning how to search things to make them reproducible, because most searches people do aren't reproducible. You have to meet different standards. Like I said, there's Prisma, right? Just for your systematic review, but there's Prisma protocol. There's a Prisma extension for searching. There's a Prisma extension for scoping reviews. So all these things you have to take into consideration. It's a lot to learn through these different methodologies. Do you have anything to add to that, Becky?
No, I think you covered it.
And then I just want to point it out. I've been talking a lot about the databases. So I like this visual because it shows you why we search multiple databases, why we say a minimum of 3. And in this example, I'm searching 4. So you have 4 different databases and you're searching them. Every database has a little bit different coverage. So the reason you search more is you're going to increase that sensitivity. So you can see the stars are all my relevant articles, and then the little circles are my irrelevant articles. So again, I'm getting a lot of noise in there, right? I'm not getting as many stars as I might want if I'm trying to do a quick lit search. But with these, I'm aiming for that sensitivity. But you can point, you can see here, and I'll point out that the stars on the outside, even you search every database known, you're not going to catch every single article out there. And that's where the citation chaining piece works really well, is because you can look at the included articles that you have in your final manuscript and go through their references. The theory is, like, if they're citing something, it may be useful to your study and maybe they found it. So I just really like this visual to demonstrate why you have to do multiple database searching.
So now we're going to do a quick appraisal exercise. We're going to look at 2 separate systematic reviews and just break down very quickly in very, very basic terms what worked in them and what did not work in them. The first one we're going to look at is this very recent one, which is a comparative evaluation between cognitive behavioral therapy and temporomandibular disorders. And so I apologize for this being blurry, but you can see a little section that describes their search strategy on the left, and then you can see their search strategy on the right. And it might be easier, I think, if we just go ahead. And instead of us breaking this down and actually doing this as an exercise, I'm just going to walk us through it. I think that's probably the easiest way to do this. And so let's read through what their search strategy actually says. So they say that they conducted the search strategy in various databases and that they employed Boolean operators and mesh keywords to ensure a comprehensive and systematic approach to identifying relevant literature. And then they provide the table of their searches, which we saw that they did. So that's a good thing. Don't go ahead yet, Lauren. Don't go back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's a positive already, because we do know that they did provide their searches. And then again, a little lower down, they reinforce the fact that they used mesh subject headings, which, if you're not familiar with them, that is a type of controlled vocabulary that is found in PubMed. Now you can go ahead. So if we actually look at their search, though, and I know that this is teeny tiny and very hard to see, if you look at PubMed and Medline, which is the very top search, there are no mesh terms in there, because they would have a little box, they would have little square brackets, and it would say mesh next to them. So I don't know what happened here, but they say that they used mesh terms. I don't know whether they were trying to actively mislead the peer reviewers and assume they wouldn't look at the table, or if they were just copying the text out of the Prisma search or another systematic review, or if they just truly did not know what they were doing and thought that they were using mesh terms, or didn't understand what mesh terms were, because there are no mesh terms in here. And that is not a comprehensive search. This is not a systematic review appropriate search. And if you looked at this and thought this was a systematic review appropriate search, then that's a problem, because this is not comprehensive enough to meet the standards of what you should be doing for this level of study. Another thing too is there's just other problems that I recognize as someone who does these. They search for standard treatment or conventional treatment or traditional therapy, and you should not be searching that as part of your search string. So this is not a great search at all. As someone who can critique this, I already know that there's some significant issues here. If you are not an expert and you do not recognize what searches should look for, you might not recognize this as a problem, but this is a very problematic search.
And I would throw out there, I always tell people, if they're searching outcomes, then it's biased, right? And that's kind of what Becky was saying with the conventional treatment and those other terms there. is you are putting in what you're wanting to get out, right? Like your outcomes are your answers. And by searching all outcomes or even just a few outcomes, you're biasing your search. So that's just like a quick check too. If you don't know that parentheses should be here, or that a subject heading should be here, or a field tag should be here for searching, outcomes is a really good place to start to see, are they searching their outcomes?
There's just other little things to nitpick too, like they do include like title, abstract, keyword under Scopus, but not in other places. So it's just the searches weren't even translated properly. So there are big red flags here for me for whether this search actually yielded proper results to make this a truly comprehensive search. And if it seems like, oh, you're just harping on the search, well, that's where all the data that this entire systematic review is based on is being pulled from. So if the search isn't done well, this is not a well done systematic review. So it has to be done well in order for the systematic review to work. So what went right? Reading through the whole thing, because I'm not going to break down the whole thing for you, that would take too much time, is they did actually register a protocol in Prospero. And they did actually use Pico to create a focused clinical question. And as we saw that they did use multiple databases, they searched a very wide range of databases. So I actually want to give them kudos for that. And they did use a risk of bias tool and identify it. And then they did use a Prisma flowchart to break down everything properly. But thumbs down, as we showed, the search was poorly constructed. There was no transparency in how they selected, what their selection process was, either in the text or in the protocol. There was no discussion of how data managed. I mean, they did the Prisma flowchart, but there's absolutely nothing about anything. And then the topic was redundant because I did a search for it, and there are many other systematic reviews on this topic as well. And so that's research duplication and honestly an argument for research waste. So let's look at another systematic review, and this is a Cochrane review on a very similar topic, which is psychological therapies for temporomandibular disorders. So we're just going to go right into what works. Again, this is teeny tiny, so I really apologize if this is very hard to see. But this is a whole section that breaks down their search methodology for their whole process. And what they do is they break down all the databases that they searched, and then each link takes you to the full search. As Lauren pointed out, one thing that's necessary according to the Prisma search protocols, you have to show the coverage. They show that the dates and everything of the databases that they covered. They break down the fact that they searched for gray literature as well, including Web of Science conference proceedings. This is in the right column now. ProQuest dissertations and theses, open gray. And then they also searched for clinical trial registries, and they provided links to all of these, and they provided the full searches to all of these. So this is very, very comprehensive. And if we go to one of these searches, and I realize now that this is completely unreadable, so I apologize, but this is a very, very comprehensive search in Ovid, and it uses subject headings, which if you can see the .exp is a subject heading. Lauren's pointing to it right now. It uses appropriate field tags throughout. MP is multi-purpose, which stands for title, abstract, and keyword in Ovid. They use the proper punctuation like truncation. And then down under 25, they use validated search strategies and filters, for identifying RCTs. So they really document every single thing that they do. So this is a completely reproducible search. And I'm not going to go into it, but they do other things right. They registered a protocol. They are very clear about their selection process. They're very clear about all their data, their data management. They're very clear about their entire process. It's completely transparent and it's completely reproducible. So really, if we have links to all the different documents that are talked here embedded in the slides, if you want to look at the two different systematic reviews and even compare them and see how different they are, that might be a good idea for you to get a sense of the difference in how this documentation works and what makes a well-documented systematic review versus one that struggles to meet the standards.
And I just like to point out too, they have a citation here for the randomized controlled trial string that they're using. So it's a validated filter, we call it, or a validated search hedge. And these are like often in really good systematic reviews as well, that they provide that citation. These are actually tested, and that's the reason they're using them. Okay, so what should you do? Appraise reviews yourself. Use tools like Moose and Amstar to appraise reviews you read. We've linked to those two here. Amstar is one that I often recommend, but Moose is a good option as well. Don't contribute, so be more knowledgeable about the problems with evidence syntheses and produce better reviews. And we're glad you're here listening to some of the issues with the current methodology. And then use our guide. So we have a whole systematic review guide that we update to the most up-to-date standards there. We have tutorial videos. We talk about searches in much greater detail there. We provide documentation tables. All this stuff is available to you on our guide. And then also we're here to help. So ask a librarian if you have questions, if you are reading review and you don't know or you don't know if the search is good, come to us. We're happy to help.
And I would just like to add really quickly, also, just when reading anything, just be skeptical. Yeah. Just in general, I mean, not even just systematic reviews, but in all literature with everything, read it and say, is this too good to be true? Like, is there something that I should maybe hesitate and look at a little more closely before I just accept this? I think that it's always a dose of healthy skepticism it's good to have.
I agree. So up next, we have our workshop series. We're going to be doing another couple sessions in the Spores of Research workshop series. We have, it's Alive, Issues with Artificial Intelligence. That one's coming up next week, I believe. And then we have a Data Disasters, How to Avoid Horror Stories in Data Management. So these are linkable or linked on here, so you can register if you'd like to. And we did a session a couple weeks ago called Dodge Deception with Critical Appraisal. So if you want to learn more about Amstar, we actually have a whole activity in there where we walk through an example using Amstar. So that's available to you as well. And we have our references. So if you want to view any of these articles, they're available here. And then we'll open the floor for any questions you have. Oh, and there will be a follow-up email and with a survey. If you do not mind, please fill out that survey. And if Laura has it, she can put it into the chat as well. But if not, you will get that email tomorrow where we ask you if this was beneficial, if there's any other areas you'd like for us to talk about in future sessions. So we really appreciate any feedback you give us.
And would you mind going back one slide really quickly, Lauren?
Yeah.
We also do have a reading list more about systematic reviews and avoiding poor methodologies and just the methodologies around systematic reviews. So if you want to deep dive into this, learn a little more, or use these materials when teaching it yourself, please take some time to look at this list that our colleague Kayla Robinson threw together for us.
Thank you. I completely forgot that was there. So thank you.
And the link is also in the chat now as well.